The entire restaurant fell silent. Every customer, every waiter, even the kitchen staff stopped what they were doing. All eyes were on the old man in the corner booth, the same man they'd been ignoring for the past 6 months. But now, as the manager slowly rolled up his sleeve, everything changed. Welcome to the last salute. That forgotten old waiter earning minimum wage is actually Harold "Ghost" Mitchell, former Special Forces medic who saved 47 lives behind enemy lines. If you want to see how he turns a dinner shift into a lesson about respect, smash that subscribe button right now. Because that arrogant young manager just disrespected someone who earned every scar on his body serving his country. And Harold's about to remind everyone in Romano's family restaurant why some battles never really end. What city are you watching from? This confrontation is about to redefine respect. Romano's family restaurant, Lower Manhattan. Every Tuesday through Saturday, Harold Mitchell arrived at 4 p.m. sharp for the dinner shift, beginning a routine that the restaurant's regular customers had grown accustomed to but never really noticed. 73 years old, Harold moved with the careful precision of someone whose joints remembered decades of hard use. His uniform was always immaculate, his silver hair perfectly combed, his weathered hands steady as he carried trays through the crowded dining room. To Romano's customers, Harold was exactly what he appeared to be, an elderly waiter working past retirement age because Social Security wasn't enough. One of New York's invisible workers, polite and efficient but fundamentally forgettable. The restaurant's younger staff treated Harold with the casual dismissiveness that service workers show each other when they think nobody's watching. Not cruel, just indifferent. He was the old guy who worked the slower sections, took the smaller tips, and never complained about anything. Harold Mitchell had been invisible his entire adult life. That invisibility had once been his greatest tactical advantage. Sergeant First Class Harold "Ghost" Mitchell, 75th Ranger Regiment. 12 years as a Special Forces combat medic. His specialty had been operating behind enemy lines, providing medical support to reconnaissance teams in places that didn't officially exist. Harold's military career had been built on being forgettable, the medic who could slip through hostile territory unnoticed, blend into civilian populations, and extract wounded soldiers from situations where conventional rescue operations would fail. His nickname, Ghost, came from his ability to appear when wounded soldiers needed him most and disappear before enemy forces could track his position. Harold had saved 47 lives during 3 tours in Vietnam, operating with the independence and resourcefulness that had earned him 3 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star. But Harold's real skill had been psychological. He understood how people saw what they expected to see, how invisibility could be weaponized, how being underestimated was often the most powerful advantage a soldier could have. Harold's war had ended in 1974, but his ability to read people, assess threats, and respond to emergencies had never left him. Working at Romano's wasn't just a job, it was reconnaissance duty in civilian clothes. And tonight, Harold's recon had detected a threat that required immediate action. If you're sensing this old waiter has hidden depths, hit that subscribe button now. Because when disrespect meets a decorated warrior, you're about to see why some people earn their respect in places others can't imagine. Michael Caruso, 28 years old, had been Romano's assistant manager for 8 months. Hired by the owner's nephew, Michael brought an aggressive management style that prioritized profit over people and efficiency over empathy. Michael's approach to staff management was systematic intimidation. He'd identify the most vulnerable workers and make examples of them to keep everyone else in line. Harold Mitchell, elderly and seemingly defenseless, had become Michael's favorite target. "Harold, you're moving too slow. Table 12 has been waiting 5 minutes for their bread." "Harold, your section's sales are down. Maybe you should consider retirement." "Harold, we need younger energy in this place. The customers want servers who can keep up." The harassment had been escalating for weeks. Michael enjoyed having power over someone who couldn't fight back. An old man who needed the job too much to complain about working conditions that violated every basic standard of workplace respect. Harold absorbed the abuse with the same calm acceptance he'd shown under enemy fire. Because Harold understood something Michael didn't. Real strength was often invisible until the moment it became necessary. Tonight's incident started with a simple mistake. Harold had been covering 3 sections because another server called in sick, managing 12 tables simultaneously while maintaining Romano's quality standards. At 73 years old, Harold was outworking servers half his age. But one order got delayed. A family's appetizers arrived 8 minutes late because Harold had prioritized a diabetic customer's urgent request for insulin-friendly menu modifications. Michael saw his opportunity for public humiliation. "Harold, over here now!" The entire restaurant turned to watch as Michael positioned himself in the center of the dining room. Every customer, every staff member, every witness Michael needed for his demonstration of authority. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Michael announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Too slow, too old, too unreliable. Maybe it's time for you to accept that you can't keep up anymore." Harold stood quietly, letting Michael build his performance. Because Harold recognized the pattern, the public humiliation, the audience, the systematic destruction of someone's dignity. Harold had seen this behavior before in places where it had consequences Michael couldn't imagine. "You know what, Harold?" Michael continued, his voice carrying across the restaurant. "I think you need a reminder of what happens when people don't meet Romano's standards." Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a written warning, clearly prepared in advance. This wasn't spontaneous management, it was premeditated harassment designed for maximum humiliation. "Sign this," Michael demanded, holding out the disciplinary form, acknowledging your poor performance and accepting a reduction in your section assignments. Harold looked at the paper. A list of fabricated complaints, exaggerated incidents, and policy violations that existed only in Michael's imagination. The kind of systematic documentation that would justify termination while protecting the restaurant from unemployment claims. "I see," Harold said quietly. "You see what? That you're too old for this job?" Harold's eyes moved methodically around the restaurant. Every face, every witness, every detail of the situation being catalogued with the precision of someone who'd spent 12 years making life-or-death assessments under pressure. Then Harold did something Michael didn't expect. He smiled. "Michael," Harold said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet restaurant, "I think there's something you should know about me." Harold began rolling up his left sleeve, slowly, deliberately, giving everyone in Romano's family restaurant time to see what had been hidden under his server's uniform for 6 months. The tattoo emerged inch by inch. First, the eagle, then the anchor, then the distinctive insignia that made several customers gasp and one elderly veteran at table 7 stand up so fast his chair fell over. Special Forces, Ranger Table Combat Medical Badge, and underneath it all, the words that made Michael's face go white: "These colors don't run." "You wanted to know about my performance record, Michael?" Harold's voice was still quiet, but something had changed. The invisible old man was becoming visible, and what was emerging made everyone in the restaurant suddenly understand that they'd been watching the wrong person entirely. Are you ready to see respect in action? Subscribe and keep watching. This old soldier is about to give a masterclass in earned authority. "Sergeant First Class Harold Mitchell, 75th Ranger Regiment," Harold continued, his voice taking on the quiet authority that had once commanded respect in places where respect meant survival. 12 years active duty, 3 tours in Vietnam, combat medic with 47 confirmed saves under hostile fire conditions. Harold's posture was changing. Not dramatically, but unmistakably. The elderly waiter was disappearing, replaced by someone who'd earned the right to stand straight and speak with authority. Purple heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, bronze star with valor device, silver star for actions above and beyond the call of duty while providing medical assistance to wounded personnel under direct enemy fire. Michael tried to interrupt. "Look, Harold, I don't care what you did 50 years ago." "You're right," Harold said, cutting him off with military precision. "You don't care. That's been obvious from the beginning." Harold turned to address the entire restaurant, his voice carrying the command presence that had once directed medical operations in combat zones. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your dinner. What you've just witnessed is something I've been observing for 8 months. A young man who confuses authority with respect and thinks that humiliating others makes him strong." The restaurant was completely silent. Every customer, every staff member, every witness was watching Harold command the situation with an authority that came from places Michael had never been. "Michael here has been systematically harassing me because he believed I was defenseless. An old man who needed this job too much to fight back. Someone who could be intimidated because he had no other options." Harold's eyes found Michael's. But here's what Michael never learned. Real strength doesn't need to humiliate others to prove itself. Real authority doesn't require an audience to validate its power. Harold reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out something that made several veterans in the restaurant immediately recognize what they were seeing. A photograph. Faded with age, but unmistakable. Harold Mitchell in combat fatigues, surrounded by wounded soldiers in a field hospital, his hands covered in blood as he worked to save lives under conditions that most people couldn't imagine. This photograph was taken in 1971, outside Khe Sanh. I'd been operating behind enemy lines for 6 days, providing medical support to a reconnaissance team that had been cut off from extraction. Harold's voice remained calm, but everyone could hear the weight of experience behind every word. 7 wounded soldiers, no backup, no resupply, no way out except through territory controlled by people who would have killed us all if they'd found us. Harold placed the photograph on the table where everyone could see it. I mention this not to impress anyone, but to provide context for what you've been watching tonight. Michael has been treating me with disrespect because he assumed I had no choice but to accept it. Because he thought being young and having a title made him more valuable than being experienced and having character. Harold turned back to Michael, who had gone completely silent. "You wanted to document my performance record, Michael. Let me help you with that." Harold began recounting his work at Romano's with the same methodical precision he'd once used to triage wounded soldiers. 6 months of perfect attendance, 0 customer complaints, highest sales per table in my sections despite being assigned the most difficult customers. Fluent in Italian and Spanish, which has helped this restaurant serve families who might otherwise feel unwelcome. Several customers nodded in recognition. They remembered Harold's extra attention, his patience with difficult orders, his ability to make everyone feel welcome regardless of language barriers or cultural differences. "I've covered shifts for younger servers without complaint, worked double shifts during busy periods, trained new employees who lasted longer and performed better because they learned respect along with service." Harold's voice took on a different tone. "But more importantly, I've been watching, observing, learning who this restaurant really serves and what kind of environment the management creates." Harold reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small notebook. 6 months of documentation, Michael. Every incident of harassment, every policy violation, every example of management behavior that would concern both the Department of Labor and Romano's corporate ownership. Michael's face went from white to gray. "You can't, that's not legal?" Harold smiled. "Michael, I spent 12 years in situations where documentation meant the difference between court-martial and commendation. I know how to keep records." Harold opened the notebook and began reading. August 15th. Management demanded I work a double shift with no break, then criticized my performance during the second shift. Labor law violation. September 3rd. Manager made comments about my age and suggested I should retire because customers prefer younger servers. Age discrimination. September 18th. Manager reduced my section assignments as punishment for a customer complaint that investigation showed was unfounded. Retaliatory action. The list continued. 6 months of systematic harassment, documented with military precision and supported by witness statements from other staff members who had been afraid to speak up individually. If this earned respect is hitting you in the heart, subscribe to The Last Salute right now. We honor these quiet warriors every week. The conclusion will restore your faith in dignity." Harold closed the notebook and looked around the restaurant one final time. "I've been invisible my entire adult life. In the military, invisibility was a tactical advantage. In civilian life, invisibility becomes vulnerability to people who mistake kindness for weakness. Tonight, Michael forced me to become visible, to remind everyone in this restaurant that respect isn't given based on age or title or appearance. Respect is earned through actions, character, and the way we treat others when we think nobody's watching." Harold turned to the other servers who had been watching in stunned silence. "You don't have to accept harassment from anyone. You have rights, protections, and more value than people like Michael want you to believe. To the customers, thank you for witnessing this. Your respect for service workers matters more than you know. Every tip, every please and thank you, every moment of patience makes the difference between dignity and survival for people who work to serve others. And finally, to Michael, your behavior ends tonight. Not because I threatened you, but because you've shown everyone who you really are. And in a service industry built on respect and trust, that's something you can't recover from." Harold began untying his apron, not in defeat, but in completion. "I'm 73 years old. I've earned my retirement twice over. I was working here because I wanted to stay active, contribute something positive, and maintain the sense of purpose that comes from serving others. But I won't work in an environment where harassment is considered management, and respect is treated as weakness." Harold folded his apron carefully and placed it on the table next to his photograph. "Mr. Romano, if you're watching this through your security cameras, you now have enough evidence to make a decision about what kind of restaurant you want to run." Harold picked up his photograph and walked toward the door. But before he left, something unprecedented happened. Every customer in Romano's family restaurant stood up, a spontaneous standing ovation for a waiter who had served with dignity, endured with grace, and left with honor intact. 1 week later, Michael Caruso was terminated from Romano's family restaurant. The notebook Harold had kept provided sufficient evidence for both corporate disciplinary action and a Department of Labor investigation that resulted in policy changes throughout the restaurant chain. Harold Mitchell received a formal apology from Romano's ownership and an offer to return at increased pay with guaranteed protection from harassment. Harold politely declined. Instead, Harold accepted a position with a veterans organization, providing peer support and advocacy for military personnel transitioning to civilian careers. His experience at Romano's had reminded him that his skills, observation, documentation, and standing up for people who couldn't defend themselves, were still needed. The photograph Harold had shown that night was donated to the Veterans Museum, along with his story of how respect earned in military service could still matter in civilian life. And at Romano's family restaurant, Harold's former section was renamed the Ghost Section in his honor. A reminder to staff and customers that every server, every worker, every person deserves respect regardless of age, appearance, or circumstances. Because some warriors never stop serving, they just find new battles worth fighting, and sometimes the most important victory is reminding the world that respect is earned, not given, and that real strength is shown through how we treat others when we think nobody's watching. Before you go, if this story of earned respect moved you, subscribe to The Last Salute and hit that notification bell. Next week, the story of a hospital janitor whose mop bucket hid medals that made surgeons stop and salute. Drop a comment about a time someone surprised you with hidden strength or service. Until next time, this is The Last Salute, honoring the warriors who serve in uniform and out.